Good afternoon, my friends. I'm a little late today because of the technology, and every day there's some little issue with the technology, but thankfully it's always correctable. So I'm continuing in my conversation with you today on understanding of existence, of life, and also our topic, which is everyday immortality, how to live everyday immortality so we can experience directly our true self in timeless now. And if we do that, then we begin to unravel the mystery of existence, and we also begin to unravel how existence evolves. We unravel the constructs of birth, death, understand our true timeless immortal nature as infinite beings beyond the constructs of birth and death. I've been talking about this for some time now, developing a sequence of arguments to prove both logically and ultimately experientially that we are immortal, timeless, spaceless, boundless, infinite, formless beings that morph ourselves into biological organisms that experience what we call existence. So I thank you for being so tolerant and patient with the sequence of arguments that I have presented. But I would suggest that if you want to actually explore what we are saying deeply, then MetaHuman is the right book. And also, you might want to go back on my previous videos, both on this both in this series, exploring everyday immortality, but also previous series on spiritual solutions for existential anxiety, for suffering, and for the fear of death, and also our explorations on the mystery of death itself. But it's always fun to engage with you. And today what I want to do is talk about the cryptographic secret code of existence. So what is the cryptographic secret code of existence? I have thought about this for my entire medical career, ever since I was a medical student. And I remember entering medical school in the year 1964 with the knowledge that a couple of years before I entered medical school, Watson and Crick had received the Nobel Prize for having discovered DNA. And I remember that, and I also remember the controversy because credit did not go fully to the woman who actually did the original work. Needless to say, the understanding of DNA changed everything in biology. So today, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. And DNA is comprised of 4 chemical bases called adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. Okay, so these are 4 chemical bases, A, T, C, G, and DNA is referred to as the alphabet of life. DNA is referred to as the alphabet of life. Right now I'm using English to speak to you. The English language has 26 letters. Most languages all over the world have more than 20 letters. But, just take the example of the English language, DNA, and compare it to the language of DNA. 26 letters of the English language can create all of literature, fill up all the libraries of the world, fill up infinite novels, non-fiction works, research works, scientific theories, etc., etc. So those 26 letters can code for all human knowledge, past, present, and future. Just 26 letters. That's the code we use in language, any language, starting with alphabets, words, paragraphs, ultimately stories, novels, epics, encyclopedias, and everything online these days. So just 26 letters of the alphabet can do that. But four letters of life can explain or create all of life. 4 letters only, A, T, C, G. The letters that make up DNA. Okay. So what is a gene? A gene is a stretch of DNA that codes for a protein. And life begins as a protein. Enzymes are proteins, and then proteins and enzymes can convert themselves into carbohydrates and fats and everything else that is needed to keep a body going dynamically as a process. DNA is the alphabet, genes are the words, and your body is a story. And your body is a story of the total universe. So the letters of the DNA, which are chemical bases, in humans we have 3 billion base pairs, which means 3 billion pairs of A, T, and C, G, strung like a spiral staircase, and the rungs are the bonds between A and T and C and G. And that's the code of existence. So 25,000 genes is what created your body. You acquired these genes from your parents, half from your mother, half from your father. The genes themselves, of course, are made of the alphabet, A, T, C, and G. And the alphabet itself is made of atoms, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and a few other elements. But carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen make up most of the biological organism, or most of life. And then there are other elements. And these elements, of course, are stardust, because all the atoms in your body were manufactured in the crucible of stars. And so the atoms in your body right now that are creating every process in the body, orchestrated by DNA, is creating the experience of life for you. We are stardust beings. With self-awareness. The universe is becoming aware of itself through us, and the universe is made of stardust. DNA is the alphabet, genes are the words, and biological organisms are the story. And of course, the biological organism experiences through its sensory apparatus what we call the physical world, and then thought interprets that, makes models of the physical world, Big Bang and cosmology and biology and physics and mathematics, the products of thought and systems of thought that attempt to explain life experiences. And your DNA, the 25,000 genes that are inside your body right now, in every little cell of your body, same genes, and of course 2 million plus extra genes, which are microbial genes in your gut, in your skin, and all the openings of your body, including the nose, the tongue, the eyes, the ears, the genitalia, the mouth, the colon, the intestine, the rectum, the urethra, all contain viruses, bacteria, fungi, and the web of genetic information that interacts with the genes in your body to create the experience of a biological organism that experiences the entire world. So we can say that DNA is the cryptographic code of life. Now, during the 9 months it takes to manufacture a human baby, which starts with a fertilized ovum, one cell with those 25,000 genes divides into two, two becomes four, four becomes eight, on. And in about 50 replications, you have a human body with 30 trillion cells. As I mentioned, these are more than all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And these 30 trillion cells are actually an expression of genetic information of the biosphere, including plants, animals, microbes, bacteria, fungi, viruses, all interacting with each other to create everything in the body: chemical messengers, metabolites, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, messenger molecules, all of that. And every cell in your body has the same genetic code. So the genes in my hair follicles, in my hair cells, in my skin cells, in my eyes, in my stomach, in my heart, in my genitalia, are the same gene, but different expression. So hair follicle is one expression, skin is one expression, brain is another expression, genitalia another expression, on and on. The same code differentiates into different expressions through activation of certain genes and deactivation of certain genes. So what activates the genes? This is the science we are now studying. What activates the genes is something that we call epigenetic processes. Epi means above, and so epigenetic means above the genes. There's a sheath of proteins. DNA is wrapped around that proteins, and only 2% to 5% of your DNA codes for proteins. The rest used to be called junk DNA. Today it's called intergenic DNA. And it is actually switching the genes that code for protein on and off. So the genes have on and off switches. And these switches are turned on and off by life experiences, any life experience. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, instincts, drives, imagination, food, eating, breathing, digestion, metabolism, elimination, sensory experience, interpretation of sensory experience, imagination, and even memory are all influencing the switches of DNA that go on and off in every moment of our existence. Experience modulates the activity of our genes. So your genes aren't fixed. They are very dynamic. And as I'm speaking right now, I'm vibrating my vocal cords. And the vibration of my vocal cords requires the transmission of electrochemical impulses from my brain to the vocal cords. And that requires a thought originally to trigger the desire for speech. And that thought then transforms itself into every activity that activates my vocal cords. I'm just giving you an example. And so thought or intention is right now activating my vocal cords. But in order for my vocal cords to be activated, you need electrochemical activity. And that electrochemical activity is actually the modulation of consciousness symbolically as that expression which makes it possible for me to speak to you. But you see, in every act of volition, and every experience of sensation, two things are involved: attention and intention. So I'll give you an example. Right now, look at your hand and be aware of your hand. Be aware of the sensations of your hand. And just being aware of those sensations and perceptions is what we call the experience that we're calling hand. And that experience only requires one thing: being aware and putting attention on this experience. Now, move your hand. So start to move this. That requires a thought, a volition. In other words, an intention. So being aware of the hand is attention, and changing the activity is intention. This is how consciousness operates. Attention is awareness of this experience, hand, and intention is changing this experience. And all experience is just one thing: sensation. Sensation. That's what we call our five senses, because they give us the experience of different sensations. So sight gives us the experience of the sensation we call color, shape, and form. Hearing gives us the experience of the sensation we call sound. Touching gives us the experience of the sensation which we call texture. Tasting, smelling gives us the experience of fragrance and flavor. All that is just attention. Then the desire to change the sensation is volition. That's intention. And that's all we experience: attention and intention. Attention is sensations as they are, sensations as they are, sensations of my hand, some kind of tingling, sensation of color, shape, sensation of sound, sensation of texture, smell, taste. That's attention, and this is changing the sensations. So we either, through attention, experience sensations, and through intention, change sensations. And this is done by a part of our brain called the motor cortex for volition and sensory cortex for attention or awareness. So when I look at my hand, then in the left part of my brain, the sensory cortex gets activated just by experiencing the hand and sensations, sensory cortex. When I move it, the motor cortex, which is in front of it, gets activated. In the case of the right hand, this is happening in the left brain. In the case of the left hand, it's happening in the right brain. But all I'm doing in every moment of experience of life is changing sensations and being aware of sensations. If you remember that, you're done. Attention, intention, experience and sensations, and changing sensations is the experience that we call life. Now, when we do this, we activate genes. So when you exercise, you start with a desire to move. Okay, so it starts with a desire, a thought. And then you start to move, and as you move, that requires the activation of certain genes that trigger the movement of muscles, which requires proteins. And not only exercise triggers the movement of muscles, it starts with a thought, but then it improves the tone of muscles, the size of muscles, the strength of muscles, and that has to be so as a result of gene activation. Gene activation, because without the activation of genes, you can't have the creation of proteins and muscles and activation and so on. So in every act of volition and every act of attention and every act of intention, we are turning the switches of our genes on and off. And this is the code of life in our DNA. I'm going to show you this very interesting book written by Japanese geneticist Kazuo Murakami, and it says The Divine Code of Life: Awaken your genes and discover hidden talents. And so what is DNA? It's the divine code that encrypts everything that we call life. 65% of your genes are the same as a banana. 70% of your genes are the same as a fruit fly. And on and on. 80% of your genes are the same as a mouse. 99% of your genes are the same as a primate or a chimpanzee or a gorilla, approximately. So what's the difference between you and a chimpanzee and a banana or a fruit fly? It's just the arrangement of the alphabet. That's all. Just the arrangement of the alphabet. But ultimately, slightly different words and, of course, completely different stories. A fruit fly is a different story than a banana, than a human being or a primate. So during our embryogenesis, when the one fertilized ovum becomes all the trillions of cells in your body, that process called morphogenesis and differentiation is just the turning on and off of genes triggered by intergenic DNA. But DNA is basically the physical symbolic expression of the Akashic field or the Akashic record of all experiences of all life forms ever since the beginning of life. Okay, so during embryogenesis, you go through all these phases. You look like a bacterium, look like a plant, an animal, reptile, an amphibian, a mammal, a primate, and finally you show up as a human being. But DNA remembers all of life. DNA also contains all of cosmic history. Why? Because the atoms and particles that ultimately make up the DNA were manufactured in the crucible of burning stars. So actually, cosmic history is encoded in your DNA. Your DNA is indeed the divine code of life. Now, if you look at a cell in your body, let me find a good diagram of a cell in the body, and I can explore this a little more later. But here's what a cell looks like. See, this is what a cell looks like. Inside the cell is a nuclear membrane. Inside the nuclear membrane is the nucleus, which contains DNA. Every cell in your body contains the same DNA with a different expression. And then the cell has a cell membrane, which has receptors to all the information molecules in your body, including the information molecules that express your emotions or thoughts. So your emotions and thoughts are creating information molecules, peptides like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, opiates when you're happy, and then other molecules like cortisol and adrenaline when you're stressed. And there are receptors to these in the cells. So your cells are eavesdropping on your internal dialogue. So everything that we call our internal dialogue, there's somebody inside you that's speaking to itself all the time. And we'll figure out in a moment who is it that is speaking to itself all the time. And that which is speaking to itself all the time is actually yourself. Yourself speaking to itself is creating every biological process in your body right now. Every biological process in your body right now. So as we look at this code of our existence, we see that if we leave it alone, we don't interfere with it, then it automatically self-regulates everything in our body. This is the highest state of intelligence that we call being. And in that being, when things are left alone, not interfered with, conceptualized, imagined, or basically interfered with, is perfect self-regulation of the body. Perfect self-regulation of the body. In being is the divine code of life being regulated, not only in humans, but all species. And the code is slightly different. It's a slightly different encryption for different biological organisms, but in fact, DNA is the divine code of life, and we regulate it by leaving it alone. So when you sleep well, when you manage your stress, when you eat right, when you exercise, when you have healthy emotions, when you connect with nature, then you're allowing the code of life to unfold. Also, when you experience interconnectedness through love, compassion, joy, equanimity, you're maximizing the evolution of that code in the direction of truth, goodness, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, and the knowingness of the non-local nature of the self, which is modulating itself and expressing itself as this code, which then expresses itself as this biological organism and all biological organism using the same alphabet. Now, within the cells of your body, if you saw the diagram that I showed you, there's little organelles called mitochondria. And unlike DNA, they are made of RNA. RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. Viruses are made of RNA as well. So actually, the mitochondria which produce energy in your body are ribonucleic acid. And difference between RNA and DNA is just one nucleotide. Instead of thymine, it's uracil. But otherwise, it's the same thing. Your mitochondria originally came from viruses, and they produce the energy in your body. And RNA regulates DNA, and DNA sends messages to the body through RNA, which then results in the creation of proteins, which then transform themselves into every metabolic process in the body. What an amazing code of existence squeezed inside the nucleus of a cell. You wouldn't be able to see it unless you had a microscope. So mitochondria, RNA are right here. When you look at the cell, then you realize it's an ecosystem of all of existence. All of existence. All life forms. And every cell is an ecosystem. And the complexity of these cells, there are 30 trillion cells in your body, which is more than all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. A single cell in your body is dynamically active with complexity and interactions that match the activity of the entire universe. So right there in your DNA is the universe manifesting itself. This is the basis of the expression in the Vedanta, Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande. Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande. As is the atom, so is the universe. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. As is the human body, so is the cosmic body. And all of that is in that little cryptographic code that we call DNA, the divine code of life. Now, as human beings who understand how to make codes, when you use WhatsApp or all these other new things, you can actually encrypt those messages. So the cosmic intelligence, creative intelligence of the universe has encrypted the codes for every living species. And these codes are slightly different, but using the same alphabet. So as we continue this series, what I will say is how do we actually consciously influence the divine code of life? Because our consciousness itself is the orchestrator of that code. Our consciousness constructs, conceives, governs, and becomes this code that governs all of existence. And if we can stay in the present moment and allow it to unfold, we will automatically recognize that who we are fundamentally is knowingness that modifies itself into different modes of knowing and experience that we call life. So this is how we create our existence and experience of life, mostly unconsciously. But when we bring it to the level of our conscious awareness, then we recognize that all this is happening in every cell in the body, and all this is happening in the entire universe. And the code is actually so infinitesimally small that can fit into the inside of the nucleus of every cell. There are 30 trillion to 50 trillion of these cells in your body. There are millions of genes in your body, and they're all interacting as the cryptographic encryption which governs all of our existence. Who is doing the coding? What is doing the coding? Where is the software coming from? And the answer, of course, is you're doing it. What are you doing to do it? Nothing. Nothing. There's no conscious effort right now on your part to regulate your blood pressure, to fine-tune your immune system, to regulate your hormones, to regulate your body temperature, your digestive processes, the growth of your hair. No conscious effort, just being. Sitting quietly, doing nothing. The universe evolves through you, by you, in you. What a great mystery that is. So what we will do now is continue with this exploration. And I will continue to explore this with you. I see that the transmission was interrupted for some of you. I have no idea why, but hopefully this will be recorded and I'll make it available on YouTube, on Twitter, on all the social networks. Okay, so for now, this is it for today. The divine code of life, coded in every cell of every living organism, expressing itself as the universe. Because it's through the organism that the universe is experienced. In fact, there's no universe, it's just a name for perceptual activity, which is species specific, governed by the cryptographic code of life. DNA is consciousness symbolized as the expression of life. And life is all experiences of every sentient being interacting with every other sentient being, creating the ecosystem that we call planet Earth, our biology, and the entire universe. Knowing this, have a little respect for viruses, because without viruses and bacteriophages and bacteria and their cooperation with the ecosystem of genes, human and animal, there would be no existence. When the ecosystem gets stressed, then everything goes out of balance. And that's what we're experiencing right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. But we will get through it, and we will go back out of our cages right now, back to the biosphere, hopefully with a little more respect, a little more humility, a little less hubris, and a little more respect for the divine code of life in every sentient being. So this is it today. This is it today. MetaHuman contains a lot of this information, but I will continue to explore it with you in these sessions as well. Thanking you for joining me in this conversation and being with me, and I'll make sure that everything comes through clearly. And if it doesn't, then I'll rectify it. But this video will be on social media, on every site, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc. Thank you.